And I think that we have all witnessed a lot of this during the pandemic because people are having to make these decisions all the time. And it's really hard sometimes to imagine what our loved one might want. So with that, I want to turn it over, and if we can have the slideshow back, the PowerPoint presentation, and turn it over to Reem.
Thank you, Terry. All right, so we'll talk about advanced directives. So advanced directives are legal documents that allow you to voice your wishes regarding medical care and or treatments if you become unable to do it for yourself. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about two forms of advanced directives, the health and the financial. So, and the differences between the two. So power of attorney for healthcare, which is you appoint someone that is very close to you to make medical decisions when you're unable to do it yourself, when you become incapacitated. And then financial power of attorney, which is a legal document that allow you to appoint an individual to make financial decisions on your behalf. So these are separate documents or forms. Next slide, please. And next slide, thank you. So in this slide, I would like to go in depth and talk about power of attorney for healthcare. So a medical power of attorney will focus on health-related decisions and it will be written according to the exact specification of someone's decisions to the directives. As such, a medical power of attorney can include provision over a wide range of medical actions, including personal care management, hiring a personal care assistant, deciding on a medical treatment, and making decisions on medical treatments on overall. So basically, this form is created specifically for making healthcare decisions, medical decisions. And this form can be used in hospitals, nursing homes, and any facility that's focused on providing healthcare. And I have over here, as you see, here is the financial. Basically, it's the power of attorney for healthcare. This is an example of how it would look like. So you would fill in the information and then indicate what you would like to be put on there on that form. Next slide, please.
Before you go on, Reem, we can go back to that slide.
Sure.
One thing that I think people need to realize is they need to choose an agent, someone who will actually use the medical power of attorney to actually make decisions for you, and then an alternate. So not just the one person, but a second person who can act for you if the primary agent is unable to act, is not available, or if something has happened to the primary agent. So think carefully about that when you are making a decision about the power of attorney. Thank you, Reem.
Right, thank you. All right, so here's the power of attorney for healthcare. So as Diane had explained to you, so when you're deciding basically to make a decision to appoint an agent can be a family member, it can be a friend, whoever that person you would like to designate to make medical decision on your behalf. So I also would like to explain more on the agent position when they're making decisions. So basically when you're choosing someone, it's someone to speak on your behalf if you become incapacitated due to an illness or an injury, and someone that can make medical decisions. Again, you can, someone that you trust that can make, or, after the passing, that would honor your wishes and go on with your wish if you want to organ donate, do an autopsy, or also for final decisions, final arrangements. that's someone that I feel it's important that when we're choosing an individual, that we're choosing the right person.
Reem, if I can comment just for a second on that.
Oh.
One thing that's important, and I know we've had attorneys involved, and I think there may be one here today. It's important to know in the state of Michigan, and actually in all states, that the power of attorney for healthcare's power basically expires with the death of the patient. So in carrying out decisions about donation and autopsy, it's a matter, organ donation and autopsy, it's a matter of following the person's directives ahead of time. If I'm somebody's power of attorney for healthcare and they haven't made any decisions about organ donation or autopsy, I can't make that decision for them. It would be next of kin. So it's just an important little point that after this particular power of attorney for healthcare expires at the time the patient expires. That's not true for financial powers of attorney. It's a different situation. And sometimes the power of attorney for healthcare will be the next of kin, so they can make those post-death decisions. But that's an important point to think about. And again, the slide says that appointed agents can't revoke the wishes from the advance directives, but things may change where they have to make a decision that is a little different than what the patient actually had put down they wanted to have done. So as Reem said, it's really important to choose wisely who that person is going to be, that they're going to be able to make the right decisions for you when you can no longer do that yourself.
Hey, Terri,
Next slide, please.
Yes.
I got a question. Are you going to comment on the process of executing this legal document?
Yes, I think that Reem is going to talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide. All right, so I want to bring an example talking about the medical power of attorney. And as Terri had, shared her just her expertise in this case. So I brought in an example of a patient, a friend. So Sarah's mother she was diagnosed with the kidney failure. So she wanted to organize her medical and financial documents for her mother. So a medical power of attorney is recommended for everyone, of course, and especially those with serious illnesses. And it's important that when a family member is creating or helping a parent to create a medical power of attorney, that to communicate on the wishes, on her mother's wishes. And it's always recommended that to follow the state basically law regarding creating the advanced directives, like medical power of attorney. So in this case, it was recommended to Sarah that when she is and her mother are drafting the document to gain or to go for an attorney's assistance in this case. So that way they are indicating the wishes, and so that way it's the way it's written. It will be very clear on that form, and also because it would require witnesses as well. Next slide. Thank you. So I have over here questions. These are collective questions through the process when we're talking about advanced directives. So one of the questions was, how do you write a medical power of attorney? So basically, it's a basic requirement for what you must include in a medical power of attorney are similar throughout the country. So, however, some states require more evidence, such as signature of witnesses present during the time of signing the document. The next question says, can a doctor override a medical power of attorney? The answer is no. A doctor cannot override a medical power of attorney. The doctor is obligated to follow the directions of the person that you designate to make medical power of attorney over you, basically making medical decisions over you. So the first question says, what happens if you don't have a medical power of attorney in this case? Well, the rules in every state is different. However, what usually happens is that the court steps in and appoints someone to take care of your medical decisions for you.
Okay.
All right, thank
This
See you later.
person, yeah,
Okay.
this.
Bye-bye.
So this person is called a conservator. So in most cases, the court will appoint a close family member for this position or role. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the financial power of attorney. Now, we talked about medical power of attorney, and now we are talking about the financial portion of it. So a financial power of attorney permits someone you have designated as an agent to oversee your finance. Typically, it is used so the person can step in and pay your bills or handle other financial or real estate matters. It can be a designation for a financial professional acting on your behalf, or you can maybe use it as to designate a trusted friend or a family member to handle matters if or when you cannot physically or mentally do it yourself. So it's important again to choose the right person wisely, as Terri indicated, that when we're choosing someone that we trust, someone that will honor our wishes, someone that will really do what we what's indicated on that document to take care of. And over here, you see by the slide, you will see an example of the financial power of attorney. So it's a bit different than the medical. So here's an example, and I was able to get this copy from, I just got it from online and put that just to show you how it would look like. But of course, if you would to go to an attorney, it can be written differently. Thank you. So examples of financial power of attorney. So I want to bring an example, and this is a friend's example. So Delise is a college professor who has planned a year-long vacation to Africa. Since she will remain in that country for a year, she was not able to make any decisions or in dealing with her finance in the state of Michigan because she was living out of the country. So she appointed her mother to act as her financial power of attorney for her property and investments. So that had to happen through a paperwork, through documents. So her mother was able, with that form that was created, was able to write checks, sign important documents for Delisa related to her investments and property. So a lot of time, if there's a financial power of attorney and that person wants to go and access your assets, there has to be a form that is well prepared and has also witnesses on that document and a notary. It has to be notarized. Thank you. So we talked about medical and financial advance directives. Now we will be talking about living will. So a living will in state of Michigan, basically it's an instruction list of your physicians, family, and friends that outlines what types of life-sustaining procedures you would want at the end of life. So, and it becomes effective only when you have been diagnosed in writing to have a terminal condition by 2 physicians. So it's a document, you would write your wishes, and that document, this form, would be signed by 2 physicians. All right, so I wanted to go into talking about the differences between a living will and a living trust. Okay, so, and I'm talking as in just generally on when we see families coming in with these forms. So a living will detail the healthcare that you want if you end up on life support. A living trust is given responsibility for managing the individual's assets for the benefit of eventual beneficiary. So 2 different documents. A living will, also called the healthcare directives, It gives you the power to take control over what medical treatments you do or don't want administered in the event you become unconscious. Now, a living trust is a document that you create during your lifetime, like a will. A trust spells out your wishes regarding your assets, your dependents, your accessors. This lets your accessors trustee to carry out your instruction as documented in your trust at your death. So your assessor, trustee also steps in if you are unable to manage your financial, healthcare, legal affairs due to unconsciousness. So this is right here, it's a very important form that can be included part of the advanced directives, your medical power of attorney. So this is talking about the Do Not Resuscitate Order, a DNR. So it is a form that also is written by a licensed physician in a consultation with a patient or a sergeant decision maker that indicates whether or not the patient will receive a CPR in a setting of a cardiac and or respiratory arrest. So this is a form once it's signed, that if someone is unable to breathe or the heart stops, they will not be performing CPR. The patient will pass comfortably or will be honored by that wish. And Terri, please feel free to interfere and share your expertise on this document.
Yes, if we can go back a little bit, back to the slide about the questions. I think it's about 4 slides back. Yes, okay. In terms of writing the medical power of attorney, which often will include information that's on a living will, many people will actually use the services of an attorney to do this. But for the power of attorney for healthcare, it is not required to be notarized. It has to be witnessed, generally by a person who's not party to this. You know, it would be an independent witness. The last time I updated my advanced directives, I was in a restaurant with the person I'd chosen to be my power of attorney for healthcare, and we had the waiter witness our signatures at that particular point. So it has to be witnessed, but it doesn't require an attorney. Many times people will involve an attorney to be able to deal with their will, their regular will, if they're setting up a trust, if they're establishing someone to be power of attorney for financial reasons, that does need to be notarized. But for medical decisions, this is not something that actually requires an attorney. So it can happen very simply. There are a lot of forms online, and towards the end of this presentation, I'm going to refer you to an organization where you can download this form to be able to do this, and one that basically recognizes every state's laws in doing this. So it's different for Michigan than it would be for Ohio, et cetera. In terms of a doctor overriding a medical power of attorney, they can't do that, but they can do it if they don't know about it. And that's sort of the big problem. People sometimes have discussed their thoughts and what they want to have happen at end of life, but they haven't written it down, or if they've written it down, they have put it someplace like their safe deposit box, which doesn't help anyone. It needs to be readily available. So the doctor needs to know what the wishes are. Right now in the state of Michigan, it is required, actually it's required nationally now, that every time you go to see, you're visiting a hospital as a patient, an emergency room, a clinic, anything that you are involving healthcare where the government is involved, where Medicare is actually paying, even if it's not paying for you, the organization is required to ask you, do you have an advance directive? They cannot refuse treatment to you if you do not, but they're required to ask if you have an advance directive. If you say you do not, they should offer to help you execute an advance directive, but they need to know if you have an advance directive. So this is really important. The doctors cannot follow the directive if they don't know what it is. And if they encounter you in a comatose position and there's no family around, they have to use their best medical judgment. And we certainly have encountered a lot of this during the COVID crisis, where people have been in ICUs and have been ventilated on extreme measures to keep them going. And doctors have had to make decisions, being unable to talk to family, running out of equipment and supplies. It's been absolutely horrendous. So it is important that we have somebody who can speak for us and have access to those documents. And again, what happens if you don't have a medical power of attorney? The physicians, the care team is going to try their best to find out what your wishes were by talking with your family, talking to your next of kin, if they can reach them. And we all know that it's been hard during this past year to be able to, the conversations have been over phones, FaceTiming, these kinds of things. Not the best situation is sitting down and really talking and being able to understand. So this year, more than ever, I think it behooves us to make sure we do have a power of attorney for healthcare, somebody who can make those decisions and have that information written down. The Hipaa laws that came into effect a long time ago, part of that was really not just to preserve privacy and confidentiality, but was to allow for healthcare organizations to share medical information about patients amongst themselves. For example, I received my care from the University of Michigan healthcare system, and my advanced directive is on file in their records. So if I show up at an emergency room and they pull up my records, they will see my advanced directives, which were updated last year, January. And basically, they will know what my advanced directives are. They also will know who my power of attorney for healthcare and the alternate. But if I'm in another area, say I'm in Detroit and I end up in an emergency room in Beaumont, they wouldn't have access to those records. So again, it is important. I have actually, and I just say this as an example, it's best to have somebody like in your phone, that ICE in case of emergency. My advanced directive, my power of attorney for healthcare is in there as the ICE contact. And actually, I've actually copied and put my advanced directive on my phone. It's under my photos, so they could basically access that. But my power of attorney for healthcare could tell them how to access that. So it is important that these documents are available in a situation when you're going to need it. And we haven't really come up with a really slick way yet to be able to share this information between healthcare systems. Are there any other questions? And I don't know if we answered the question before about executing the power of attorney for healthcare.
Terri, this is Jerome again. Thank you for using the term readily accessible, because that's been the theme of our entire workshop on end-of-life planning. In our Grave Matters class, we give a list of the types of documents that should be readily accessible, this being one. And we encourage all those who take that class and all those who, even if they don't take the class, we call it, put it in a binder, make it readily accessible, make sure that the loved ones who know where it is, and the safety deposit box may not be the best unless they have access to the safety deposit box. And I'll be the first to tell you that on a personal note, because I have two homes, one in Florida and one in Michigan, and I'm back and forth all the time, I keep a binder in both locations, okay? And my key family members know where it is.
Very wise. It's very wise.
So I'm glad you mentioned readily accessible, because having it, nobody knows how to get to it, defeats the purpose.
And the healthcare team can't read our minds. I'll give you a personal example. I have had two different advanced power of attorney for healthcare, my designated decision maker. I am not married. I do not have children. And so in both cases, it has been a very good friend. My first one, actually, he died. So obviously I needed to update this. And I just updated it again last January. And while we were meeting, and my discussions with both of my powers of attorney for healthcare, they made big assumptions that because I was a nurse, because I had been a hospice nurse, that I would obviously not want anything done to preserve my life. And so I've written my advanced directives very specifically to say, depending on the situation, if I could return to a state where I'm able to communicate with those around me, be able to read and write, I would not like to be paralyzed, but if I can communicate, then I want you to do everything you can to bring me back to that. And they both were very surprised, saying, well, don't you, aren't you all about just letting people die naturally? And so we had to have that discussion, and I'm really glad we did, because I wouldn't want them making decisions on their assumptions because of the work that I have done, that I would feel differently. And again, I would say it's important to choose that person wisely. Sometimes it's not best to be a family member. Some family members are too close to the situation and could never give up on the person, and they may never be willing to let them go. So it's important to have these discussions. I teach a course each year to the School of Pharmacy, to these PharmD students, and part of their assignment, we watch Extremists, we watch a few other things, and basically we give them assignments not to grade them so much. There are some pharmacy questions they get grades on, but I really want to know what they're thinking. And so I ask if any of them have advanced directives. And generally out of a class of about 50, there might be one or two. And then I usually put a question in asking why or why not. And most of them will say, I'm too young. I don't need it yet. I'll wait until I'm older. And so I always encourage them, because one of the classes is usually right before Thanksgiving. And back in the day when we had students on campus and they went home for Thanksgiving, I encourage them to have the discussion with their families over Thanksgiving dinner, to talk with their parents and grandparents. What do you want done? To have these discussions before it's needed. It's a much better, as much as we avoid it, it's much better to have it in an environment where we can talk about what is important to us rather than waiting until the stress is there, the person is on the ventilator, we don't know what to do, and all the emotions then become very, very difficult. And that, when you watch Extremists, you will see that basically very clearly, that these are heart-wrenching decisions to make under the stress of somebody being near death. Okay, I'll give it back to Reem.
I wanted to mention something as well, Terri. You were talking about readily accessible. When you actually complete these documents, your agent 1 or agents 2, each of them needs to have a copy of your document, so that if they need to prove that they are the medical power of attorney, they can bring that with them and give it to, or have copies made of it at the hospital or at a nursing home, wherever you are, so that they can in fact act. Because if it's not readily available, if it's not at the hospital, you can even send one to your PCP, your physician, so that they have a copy. Because if it's not in hand, I know with hospice, if it's not in hand, a family member can't walk through the door and say, I'm the medical power of attorney, without the document.
Very good point, Diane.
Yeah.
Indeed. So yes, thank you so much to Terri and Diane in regards to just going in depth and explaining more about the importance of having the medical power of attorney documents created, and when, and also how to access or be able to have it accessible when there's a need. So I also would like to share with you that these forms can be, even I know that there are primary care physicians that do provide these documents in their office as well. And you can always ask, there's also the health insurance. Your health insurance will be able to provide you with these documents. And as Terri had indicated with the witnesses on this form, you just need someone that is not a family related to you to be able to witness, and for that form to be, or the document to be basically documented as or used properly. That's very important to look into it. And of course, you can always call an attorney, and they're the experts when it comes to these form of documents. So can we go to the last we're close to the slides. It's actually, yeah, after the DNR. Correct. So I wanted to share with you, and this is very important, that in order to create a power of attorney, the individual must be mentally competent. If your parent or adult relative become incapacitated, it will be too late to authorize power of attorney. So if someone is not competent, they cannot create a document, and you can't create that for them either. So the court, in this case, the court will likely need to get involved to appoint an individual to help manage a person's affairs. So I will share that it is very important to look into creating these documents, these forms, starting step by step, starting with the medical power of attorney, drafting, write your wishes down on what you would like or want to be done when you are in a time or a phase in life that you are unable to do it yourself.
If we can go back to that slide, sorry. I think another important point of this is we've seen this over and over again, especially for people who are in long-term care. They may enter the nursing home or long-term care, and they may have come after surgery or a broken hip or whatever, and they're doing okay. And then maybe dementia sets in, and they haven't done an advance directive, and they're getting weaker and weaker, and the family comes and says, I don't want them to be resuscitated. Unfortunately, the family can't make that decision for them if they have not appointed the family to be their power of attorney for healthcare. And this is important because, again, we don't want people just being written off because they're old or because they have dementia. But it is important that these conversations happen with families, because many times it may be a couple and the spouse dies. Maybe the husband could have given permission for his wife, but he dies, she's left, she is now declining, and the kids come in, or a niece or nephew, and says, well, I don't want anything done, but they really don't have the legal right to make that decision. So then it is a matter of either going to court and having a court-appointed guardian. And that happens in a lot of situations, but it is unfortunately an unnecessary step, because we can prevent that by having somebody appointed to make those decisions. And there's just lots of reasons to do this ahead of time, even though, as we've discussed, this isn't probably the favorite subject to be talking about, but it is important to plan ahead. The other thing I wanted to mention about advanced directives is we have used the term, and we bandy this about in healthcare a lot, the use of extraordinary means. And again, extraordinary can mean a lot of different things to different people. Back in the 40s, penicillin was extraordinary treatment. Today, antibiotics, it's a no-brainer. But things have become much more sophisticated in terms of healthcare. Many surgeries that required long hospitalizations today are practically drive-throughs. And so it's important for people to define exactly what they mean. It's not enough to put on your advance directive, I don't want any extraordinary means taken, but it's a matter of really discussing. And again, for some people, it may be a matter of going through step by step. I had a situation, my mother died of colon cancer, and she was very clear that she never wanted to be on a ventilator under any circumstances. It was very clear to all of us that that's what should or should not happen. But for other people, I would want to be on a ventilator if I could be brought back and have a reasonable state of life at that particular point. So just to say no extraordinary means or no tubes. I remember a patient for whom I cared years ago, and this woman, a lovely, lovely woman, and I do have permission to share the story, obviously not with names, but she was being cared for in the middle of her living room, beautiful view of the woods, lovely, lovely home. And her husband was her primary caregiver. And I went to visit one day, and she was having a lot of problems with urinary incontinence. And she was still very alert, and it was very distressing for her. And it was very distressing for her to have to be basically put in briefs, diapers by her and cleaned by her husband. And so I suggested to her and her husband that perhaps it would be a good idea if we placed a Foley catheter. And they wanted to think about it for a while. By the time I came back for the next visit, she had declined quite a bit and she was not able to really give us an answer. Her husband said, well, I can't let you do this because I promised her no tubes. And at that point, and we're talking 30 years ago, I think that what he thought for tubes would be like being intubated and having a ventilator. And I explained it was a really very simple procedure. We would certainly abide by whatever his decision was. And he agreed to let me try. And so we placed a Foley catheter in her, and it made life so much better for him. And I think for her, even though she wasn't as conscious as she had been. So to just say something like no tubes, don't do this, don't do that, it takes some specificity. And so we really do need to think about that and review those documents, at least on an annual basis. I think it's important that we look and see if we've changed our mind, or if something, depending if we've come up with another disease or we have something else bothering us, it might change our decision about what we want to have happen at end of life.
Another question that might be on some people's minds is, would I want to be the agent? Would I want to be the person who has to obey or follow through with the medical power of attorney? Do I want to be that person? And I raise that point as well because from my own experience, I know even when you've had the conversation, even when you are clear in your own mind what you are supposed to do, it does take a willingness to do it, and it's not something you would want yourself. So I think if you are asked to be the power of attorney, if you take on that responsibility, then I think you should think carefully about what you're agreeing to. With my mother, and I guess all of us have some stories, don't we? Especially preachers. With my mother, she had said to me years ago, if something happens and they come to you and say, what about a feeding tube? She knew how I felt about it, that feeding tubes, in my estimation, can be more harm than good, depending on the circumstance. She knew that. And so she came to me and said, hook me up. If something happens and I need a feeding tube, be sure that I get it. She was so clear about this one point that it was put in her will and her advance directives. One day, my mother was in a nursing home at this time. I'm in Michigan. She's in a nursing home in Mississippi. I'm not there. I can't be there. I get a phone call out of the blue. Is it all right if we give your mother a feeding tube? What? What are you talking about? There was no discussion. Mother had not approached me about it. The doctors were asking about a feeding tube, wanting me to give permission because I am the agent. And I said, wait a minute, let me talk to someone about it. I'd like to have a conversation about this. I think if I had not been working in hospice and if I had not had the experience of communicating around these issues already, I would have been terrified. I talked to first the doctor who was going to do the surgery. He explained what was going to happen. And of course, I was familiar with it because I'm in hospice and I know what the process is, but I wanted to hear him say what was going to happen. And in the end, he said, if it were my mother, I wouldn't do it. Then I talked to the physician who had made the recommendation. And the physician went on to explain why the feeding tube would be appropriate. And so I'm listening to two different physicians, one who has told me I wouldn't do it if it were my mother, the other who has recommended that it happen. And I thought in that moment, if I had not had my mother's directive, if I had not been informed, if I had not had the conversation, I would have been crazy, because two opposing ideas about this very significant decision had been presented to me by the experts. So again, and of course, she got the feeding tube because it was in the will. She knew, she'd already told me, and I was going to do it. But I wanted the conversation. If I had been naive, then that could have been an alarming reality. So again, this is just to underscore the significance of the role. If you agree to be someone's agent, please do ask as many questions as you can and get as much information as you can. With the advanced directives for healthcare, you don't get all the details. With the living will, you can list what you want to happen. It gives you room. You can stipulate, I want this, I want that, I don't want the other. Have the conversations, whether you are the person writing, drawing up the directive, or the person who's being asked to be the agent. Get as much information as possible so that you can respect their wishes, and so that you can, if you're the agent, get yourself together.
It just taken too long.
Thank you, Diane. That was really very helpful. And again, it just underscores the importance of having these conversations. Not always pleasant, but it's easier to do when we're all feeling healthy and okay, rather than waiting when we're in the situation. I think many of us have many more yesterdays than we have tomorrows. And I think this is the gift we give to our loved ones, to be able to make these plans ahead of time. I'm so impressed with what you're doing with this entire workshop on grave matters, because it is just a great gift if we can do these things ahead of time for our families and those that are going to be left behind, so that they can feel comfortable in the decisions they make on our behalf.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Reem, you want to add to this part?
I just wanted to ask if anyone has questions for us to answer their questions.
So if anybody has questions, feel free to come off mute and ask your question. I'll just sort of start it off. I really enjoy the advice about doing it during a holiday where, you know, you're already feeling good and excited and jovial and not thinking about such matters. That's great advice. The other advice that I really honed in on was having something on your cell phone, something that is with you wherever you go. Now, a lot of people cringe at having such private information on your cell phone, but the information that's in an advanced medical directive is not necessarily so private. It's just more instructional. And so, and then the whole ICE thing, in case, what do you call it, in case of emergency? Right. You know, that's when people want to go through your cell phone when you're not able to do that yourself. That's the first thing they're going to look for, ICE. And I have that on my cell phone, which is a direct line to my wife. So that's just really, really good advice that I didn't think of. Because yeah, I have my documents in a waterproof, fireproof box sitting in my basement here. But you know, what happens if I'm out in these streets somewhere and things happen? So that's really, really good advice that I didn't even, you know, think of. So I really appreciate that.
Well, they're trying to develop a couple of apps. There was one that I thought was good, but it didn't really have, it just said who your person was. But again, you had to log onto it. So if you're unconscious and you don't have a phone with, you know, your thumbprint or whatever, that might be a little more difficult. So I think they're going to come up with even better apps. But I just took a picture of mine and it's in the photos, and that can be accessed very easily to be able to do that. But technology is helping us in this regard. I know it can be challenging for a lot of individuals, but having that access and availability is really important.
You know, one thing I want to add, because when with one of my brothers, I lost all my brothers, but the problem was he was so fragile that even if he wanted to be resuscitated, the doctor said, if you do that, if we do any pressure to try to resuscitate your heart, that could break all your bones. So it becomes more of a medical emergency than just a wish of what you want.
Right, right. I mean, it's the clinical situation will determine things. Again, for me, if it were a matter of breaking a couple of ribs and I still was going to be alive, I'd probably be willing to live with that. But, you know, if it was going to break a rib and puncture a lung and do other kinds of things, then yeah, the clinical situation is really important.
I wanted to ask, there's so many different things that may happen when you're under medical distress. How do you know what to include? Is there in the document, do they include everything that you may not be thinking about yourself, that that gives you a suggestion of what to comment on or what you want or what you don't want? Because you can't think of everything. How do you cover everything?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Reem.
It's all right. So yes, there are actually forms that would give a list, and then you can just check in to indicate which of you are interested in including in your advanced directives. Again, if you're getting that forms, it's easy to find, but also if you're drafting it with an attorney, they can assist or even include the wishes or include what you would want on that form.
Okay, thank you.
And again, it also underscores the importance. You're right, it's impossible to cover every eventuality, but the major ones like being tube fed, being on a ventilator, and having CPR. Now they're able to actually implant a cardiac device to keep your heart. It's an external cardiac device that can keep your heart going. So, you know, these are complicated things. We don't envision, having to deal with all of those things. So everything isn't going to be on that list, but it underscores the importance of choosing the right person to make decisions for you. Because it may come up, as was mentioned, that yes, CPR might have been a good idea, but if the patient is so fragile that doing the CPR would cause more harm than good, then that medical power of attorney probably has to make the decision, let's not do that, even though your wish might have been to have it, but you didn't have all the information at that point. So it goes hand in hand. It's not enough just to have it in writing. It's important to have the right person making those decisions.
Exactly. I would like also to add, and as Diane actually had commented before, is that you can choose 2 agents in this case. Let's just say, for instance, the first person doesn't feel comfortable anymore to make those decisions. The second person, secondary, or a second agent can come in place. So it's always good to have the choosing the right people, to also have backup plans, but also to make sure that you're really reviewing it from time to time, reviewing these forms and documents, making sure that if there are things that you want to change or you would like to include.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good point, Reem. And one other thing I wanted to mention about DNRs is the Do Not Resuscitate Order, is that once you execute it in writing, in the state of Michigan, all Do Not Resuscitate orders must be signed by a physician. I've never quite understood this completely, because it used to be that seemed to be the physician was making the decision. It really should be the patient who's making the decision, and then it's just sort of co-signed by the physician. But another important part of this is you may have that in writing, but the law says you can change your mind and you can indicate that verbally or in writing. So if I had a DNR order that I had executed, if I changed my mind, if I thought something was happening, I could tell somebody, no, ignore that. So you have the right to revoke that. And it's important. This isn't necessarily till death do us part. It is a revocable document as well.
Correct.
And that's that other great advice about revisiting this on an annual basis. And I guess during a family gathering, whether it be Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever, just make it a habit of revisiting this on an annual basis, just to see, hey, is there something that I didn't think about last year or something that has changed in my whole philosophy one year? So that's also great advice, to do it around a time where you're definitely in a happier place, as
Right.
opposed to a more stressful timing. So that, again, great advice. Thank you.
Good point. Can we move to the next slide then? I just want to go over a little history. And there are 4 sort of crucial situations. These are really, they've determined a lot of the law around end-of-life care. Karen Ann Quinlan, in 1976, basically, she consumed some Valium with alcohol while she was on a crash diet. And she basically went into a coma and never came out of that. She was in a vegetative state. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But basically, she was 10 years in a coma. And her family wanted to be able to stop the feeding tubes. The medical community at that point, she was young. They weren't sure what was going to happen. They were hoping she would come out of this. She was breathing okay. So it wasn't a matter of pulling the vent or stopping that, but they continued to tube feed her. She never had any response to her family, and they wanted to be able to let her die naturally. And basically, that was not allowed. This was in New Jersey. And this case actually went all the way to the Supreme Court in New Jersey. And they had to work on this for years before they were finally allowed to withdraw the feeding tube and let her die naturally. Her parents then established the Karen Ann Quinlan Hospice in New Jersey. And this was sort of a landmark case when people first were starting to think about these things. Nancy Cruzan basically was in an auto accident and basically never regained consciousness. And so she basically was 8 years in a vegetative state, again with a feeding tube. And the family had to go through the same things in terms of petitioning, trying to stop the feeding tube. Again, people were saying at that point in the medical community, they were saying, if you're doing this, you're killing your daughter. And that was really hard for the family. They didn't know what the wishes were. These were young people, 21. And again, young people don't think that they have to think about these kinds of decisions. But we know, especially with COVID and a lot of other things, we do need to think ahead of time. And then Terri Schiavo, I think a lot of people may remember this one. This was in Florida. She had a cardiac arrest, a very sudden cardiac arrest, young woman, young mother. And they were able to they revived her, basically, had her breathing again, but she again went into a persistent vegetative state. And in this situation, it was really challenging because this went on for years. And basically, her family was in a fight with her husband, who was her next of kin. He wanted to stop the feeding tube. Mom and dad did not. They were absolutely adamant that we keep feeding her no matter what. They looked at reflexes as thinking that she really did understand lots of medical arguments in this. This went all the way basically to Congress, to President George Bush at the time, and came back again to Florida. And finally, the decision was made that the husband was the legal person to be able to make the decision to withdraw the feeding tube. In fact, it had been stopped at one point and started again. And just wrenching. It was very, very hard. We followed this in the media as well. Very hard for this family. And again, she was a young woman. The husband said he felt he knew what she wanted. The parents said, no, she would have absolutely not wanted that. So you can imagine the schism in that family trying to deal with all of this. Then a more recent case is Brittany Maynard, who basically was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And she was diagnosed in 2014, I believe. If you can go to the next slide, I think I have some dates down there. She was diagnosed in April, and she knew what was going to happen, that there was absolutely no way she was going to recover from this brain tumor. And she had done her research and did not want to die in the way that people usually die from a brain tumor. So she lived in California at the time, she elected to go to Oregon, where there was physician aid in dying. And in November, she died after invoking that right and privilege that she had in the state of Oregon. It was illegal in California to do so. And I bring this up only because of the fact that right now, there are 11 states and the District of Columbia that have laws that allow physician aid in dying. We had this on the ballot in Michigan years ago after Dr. Kevorkian, or Mr. Jack Kevorkian, I'll just say, after he was sort of doing his own thing. Certainly in hospice, we believe that people can be kept comfortable 99% of the time. And so we honor life until the very end. So again, there are a lot of religious views on physician aid in dying. There are a lot of political views. And then there are the people that say, we do it for animals. Why don't we do it for people? I bring it up not to be on one side or the other, but just to make you aware. Again, every election, generally there is one or two more states where this is on the ballot. So again, the states where it is legal at this point are California, Colorado, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Montana. It's not actually a law in Montana, but the legislature has agreed to not prosecute any physician who would engage in this. It's legal in Maine, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, and the state of Washington and New Jersey. So you can sort of see across the country that this is becoming something that we're hearing more and more about. But these cases, the earlier cases, really brought about the idea of having advanced directives and making that a legal document so that people can actually have the right decisions made. Next slide. Again, the Patient Self-Determination Act of 1990, and this was sponsored by our own Senator Sandra Levin in Michigan. Again, saying patients can decide what they want to have done. They're the ones who can really decide themselves. It's not up to just the physicians. And then Michigan Dignified Death Act was 1978, again, saying that people have the right to refuse what they see as extraordinary treatment. And then again, it was 2014 that the first Death with Dignity Act, Physician Aid in Dying, came in Oregon. Next slide. Again, I think this probably goes without saying, everything that's ethical is not necessarily legal, and everything that is legal is not necessarily ethical. So these kinds of decisions bring up all sorts of ideas in terms of ethics and things that should be right. I mean, it was ethical years ago for families to be able to decide for their children, their adult children, to remove the feeding tube. That would have been the ethical thing to do, but it wasn't legal. So if they had done that and insisted on doing it, they would have had some legal consequences. And again, everything that is legal is not necessarily ethical. It would be nice if families could just make decisions for their loved ones without having to go through all of the trouble of having things notarized and whatever. But we have laws to protect us as well, so that people don't make rash decisions about their families. Next slide. COVID has certainly had a big impact on our world, and certainly in Michigan. And boy, it's certainly not nice to be #1 in the country leading COVID cases right now. But again, we have seen this. We have seen it in the news. We've seen it with friends and family. Some of you have heard this story before. You know, I talked about back in August when Belle Isle had that beautiful exhibition of all of the people lost in Detroit, basically in the first 9 months of COVID. I've never been so moved as I was by driving through Belle Isle and seeing those pictures and seeing those people that couldn't see their family for one last time. We've all had experiences, both in our lives, in hospitals, and in nursing homes and hospices. It's something that's in our face every day. And it is difficult. It's difficult to live with this, but it really does have an impact on making the right end-of-life decisions. I want to open it up a little bit and see if anyone wants to share how they've experienced COVID and how this maybe has made them think about end-of-life decisions a little bit more. Any thoughts or comments?
I have a comment, not necessarily about just the COVID, but it's also like a gray area because it's tangible and intangible. Tangibly, when you're on life support, that's the only thing keeping you going. Intangibly, a lot of folks feel that miracles can happen. And like the word says, by his stripes we are healed. That makes it a difficult decision for some people to make. Just food for thought.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And you're absolutely right. And I think sometimes we get the impression that the medical community scoffs at us a little bit when families say, well, the medical community may say, the healthcare team, there's nothing more we can do. And the family comes back and says, but with God, anything is possible. And we want to keep going. And they should be able to do that. Again, faith is important. And there are miracles that happen. It's not absolute. We can't tell the entire future. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
And it's also appropriate that a patient who comes onto hospice, for example, does so without a DNR. They may be coming to hospice with an understanding, on the one hand, that I have this terminal disease process going, but on the other hand, they're living in hope. And there was a time when hospice would require that you had to sign a DNR in order to come onto hospice service. That is no longer the case. You can decide to come onto hospice. We will provide the care which is appropriate under hospice. And as things change, the patient may decide, I'm okay. I will just ride this out. I'm becoming more and more accepting of the terminal diagnosis and the outcome I'm expecting. On the other hand, a patient may come on to hospice knowing it's a terminal disease without a DNR and hoping for cure, hoping for good health, and they may never agree to the DNR. They may decide, I don't want hospice anymore. If something changes, they notice that they're declining, or the family notices they're declining, and they can actually leave hospice and get curative care. So that is also possible. So keep that in mind as well. And that's true across the board with hospice, that someone who comes on the service and is receiving hospice care can decide, I don't want this anymore. I want to try. They feel better, they are able to do things, and they may, because they don't have pain and their care needs are being met, and they decide, I want to keep trying, I want to try again. And they can elect to get off of hospice with the understanding that they can come back to hospice if things change again. So keep that in mind. We do not want to suppress anyone's hope that this can be different.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Reverend Diane. There's so many different things going on through my head right now. I'll just share a couple. I had a friend who was my age, and I'm 51. Her fiance got COVID, and she dropped him off at the hospital, hoping that, hey, just she didn't know he had COVID. He didn't know, he just had some symptoms and what have you. So the natural thing to do is to, and they wouldn't let her into the hospital. And 30 days later, he passed away, unfortunately. And so, basically having these things in place, obviously she can be on the phone and talk to them about wishes and things like that. But I don't know what the difference was, because they were engaged, but not yet married. And so I don't know what the exact, and I didn't want to get into the details with her. That's personal, but those are things that are real that people just sort of, turn a little bit of a blind eye on. And then another case, a really good friend of mine had went into a coma type situation and ended up being for like 3 years. And so a lot of people make certain decisions based on, you have that hope, but there's also the financial aspect of it, because if you're going to deplete if you're going to make a decision medically that might deplete your entire financial situation, better understand what benefits you have and have access to, so that you're not making a decision thinking that you're going to deplete your entire financial status of your legacy or your family behind you. Well, whereas your insurance or veteran, whatever you have access to, Medicaid, Medicare, can cover certain things. So knowledge is power. Understand that, so that you're not making a decision that you think is going to, affect you. So you get where I'm going with that. It's better to know all this information so that you're making informed decisions. And I'll just sort of pause there. But no, this is great conversation and very timely.
Well, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And again, it's what you're talking about is really balancing the benefit and the burden, looking at what it's really going to mean. Can we go to the next slide, please?
While we're going to the next slide, can I say one more thing?
Sure, absolutely.
One thing about hospice, a lot of folks hear hospice and they think it's a death sentence, but it's not. And I know that because I lost all three of my brothers and my mother, so I know what it's like for hospice. And what the story is, it's just to make it more comfortable for you. My brother was on hospice about 5 or 6 different times. He lived like 8 years after they had said he wasn't going to make it through the night. And so you have to remember, hospice is not a death sentence. It's just to make you comfortable. And if you got the proper insurance, they'll take care of that. Plus hospice, with at least with one of my brothers, they gave him a television, they gave him everything that he needed. So it wasn't anything out of my pocket. So that's just food for thought for folks to understand.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. Generally, when we do any sort of discussions about hospice, I ask people what the first word that comes into their mind when we say the word hospice, and they say death, because they think it is a death sentence. But you're right. We feel that it's important for people to live each day to the end of their life, and we are adding life to their days, not days to their life. And that's what we are all about. So we really appreciate you clarifying that. On this slide,
Reverend Stokes has a question.
Sure, absolutely.
Can you come off mute, Reverend Larisi?
This is all very, very helpful information. And you can't emphasize the word before enough. Before. And the other thing that you have that would be helpful to people who find themselves in that predicament, not necessarily the person who is sick, but their advocates, their children, that this is not about getting well. You see, when you're looking at hospice, they're not trying to heal you. And that's important, because I've run across in my own family, extended family especially, they find themselves in palliative care and moving toward hospice, and they just can't get to the reality that these people are not here to heal you. These people are here to make you comfortable and to give you dignity of life while you're still alive. So that word before and clarity is the other thing. Be real clear as to what is to be expected in the hospice experience.
Thank you, Reverend Larisi. Very, very valid points. Yesterday was April 16th, and it is National Healthcare Decisions Day. And I want you to try to guess why that might be. What happens on April 15th every year? Most years.
It should be the tax man comes.
Taxes. And again, this date was chosen because, going back to Benjamin Franklin's line years and years ago, there are two things that are certain: death and taxes. And so I certainly paid my dues, rendered unto Caesar what was Caesar's yesterday, or on the 15th. And again, they've chose this day to sort of remind people. So this is a good time on tax day every year to review advanced directives. And again, you'll see in the slide, 90% of Americans have heard of living wills. 70% of us have real definite ideas on what we want at end of life, but only 30% have documented those ideas on a living will or advanced directive document. There's a short clip which is going to play now called Imagine. And again, it's the idea of what we can do to help our family. So if we can go ahead with that clip.
All right, one sec. Give me one sec. Got a lot of things going here.
You are the producer, so we bow to you.
There we go. Where did it go? Almost there. Bear with me.
You're fine. You're fine.
Oh, there it is. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Hear it?
Thank you for showing that again. And we'll have those resources in the PowerPoint. You can actually go into nationalhealthcaredecisionsday.org or this particular conversationproject.org and on that website, there are the advanced directives that you can actually print off for every state in the union, which is really great. Next slide, please. Again, we've talked a lot about the inevitable, and that can be fairly depressing at times. And we all appreciate your attention and your involvement today, but I always liked this particular cartoon. You know, one day we will die, Snoopy. Yes, but every other day we will live. And so I hope we can embrace each day that we live, this beautiful day today, as we plan for that eventuality for ourselves and our families. So I personally appreciate all your attention. And I hope you'll get a chance to watch Extremis, and I'll turn it over to Diane and Reem and see if they have any final comments.
I would just say thank you so much. This has been a wonderful time with you. I always enjoy these times of sharing information and education and hearing your questions, because your questions and your comments actually feed our training. We learn from you, we grow with these experiences. This has been a phenomenal time with Hartford Memorial Baptist Church. So thank you so much, and I have a feeling you'll see me again.
Okay.
Everyone have a wonderful, blessed day. And
Hold
when
on
you
before-
do choose who's going to be in charge of your care during your time of illness, you got to be very careful, because I do remember my mother-in-law, who was like a mother, and the brother-in-law who was like a brother. I was there for my wife at that time, and she was there for me with my family, make certain that somebody you could feel comfortable with also.
Thank you for your
Thank you,
comments
Tony.
Yeah, thank
and all
you.
your questions, Tony. And thank all our presenters. This has been a very capstone into our, well, I don't call it an end, but a fitting addition to the Grave Matters sessions that we launched in February. And as I said at the outset, they're online, so they're available to you at any time. Okay, so you can go back and view any of the information that we've heard. And I want to give a shout out, I think he's still on the line, to Brother John Bradley, who did a great recording in one of the modules of Grave Matters on the legal aspects and the legal help that is available. He's not soliciting, but he's certainly making available the help that legal aid can provide.
Absolutely.
We also have a document. Hold on, John. We also have a document on the site developed by the American Association of Retired People, AARP. It's not our document, but we have it on our site, of low cost or zero cost assistance to help with preparing some of these documents. These are sanctioned by AARP, and they're right there for you at your disposal, one place shopping. And finally, and then I'll turn it over to John if he wants to say anything, we have an example of all the types of documents that we think it would be wise and prudent that you put together in one location to have accessible in case situations arise where your loved ones or your agents need to get at them. And that's all available on our site. So you can access it at any point in time. John, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, basically just dovetail off of what you just said. This is a perfect tie-in with what we did back in February. This basically just expands in much greater detail about everything that we talked about back in February. And hats off to the presenters today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, John. I consider that high praise from the legal beagle.
Absolutely.
Reverend Larisi has her hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I also want to thank the Hartford Men United for agreeing to reach out to something more than our membership and throughout the community. As you know, Pastor Christian and Pastor Adams, Pastor Charles Gilchrist Adams always say that you may not belong to this church, but this church belongs to you. Mm-hmm. So we're an outreach facility, and I want to urge the Hartford Men United to continue to partner with other ministries in the church. This is very important information. You don't have to just rely on, I'm not insulted if you go forward without pastoral care ministry. But as you know, we have a host of ministries at Hartford, and there is never going to be a time such as this that all these ministries will need you. You're a good agent for getting the word out, and I absolutely highly recommend Angela Hospice to help you and work with you. But there are other ministries throughout just Hartford that you could continue to reach out to. This was a good, excellent, informative session, and I appreciate it very much. I'll be sure to let Pastor Christian know just how excellent it was.
And one thing I want to let you know, Reverend Larisi, is that, we as Jerome and I are part of the leadership of Hartford Men United. We're just the facilitators of this. This will, and like I said, with the workshop that we did in February, we may have had, I can't remember how many participants we had, in February, but basically since it was recorded and on Hartford's YouTube account, that participation grew about 4 or 5 times. And so the same thing will happen with this. And so I really appreciate the presenters giving us permission to record this and to make it available. The same website that you joined this is the same website that all of this will be. And Reverend Stokes, as the leader, one of the leaders of Hartford, this will sit on, if you have a website, this will sit directly with you guys. It'll also be with us, but, we'll have a direct link there as well, because this is part of, your ministry. And so this is just sort of, one of the services that we will offer for you in your role as Minister of Pastoral Care, because this is something that, is critical into the mission of the church. So we at Hartford Men United is just a facilitator of this. It's just going to sit with your ministry. So just wanted to let you know that. And I don't want to, I know there are other people who may have questions. So I don't want to, we're kind of sort of ending it, but I want to make sure that if anybody else has questions, that they have the opportunity to ask that.
Ron, actually, can you go to the next slide, please? I would like to share something with the viewers. So this is advanced directives. What we have is a link. It's a PDF file, and it's an example or sample of a medical power of attorney. So if you just access that link, I hope we will be able to do that. You'll be able to see a very well drafted medical power of attorney.
Oh.
Okay. Do you want me to do that now, or are you just leaving that as a takeaway?
A takeaway.
Okay, good.
Well,
anybody else have any questions?
Anybody got any questions?
Comments?
Well, hearing none, and I'd like to, we've been here for a little, getting close to a couple hours. So I'd like to close out again, all thanks to all our presenters. Thanks tremendously to Brother Spears for his expertise and lending it to us to make it possible. And I thank you for all those who signed on to take advantage of this workshop. And I pray that it will be useful to you in the event, well, even before any event like in your life that might happen where it would become necessary, or certainly able to make things better for those whom you loved. We titled our workshop Grave Matters, but we added a very appropriate subtitle to it, Leaving a Legacy, Not a Burden. And so these things we do because we love our family members and those who love us. And when we take advantage of them in good times, we will certainly avoid leaving a burden to them. With all things, if all minds are heart and clear, I'd like to end with a closing prayer. Is there any other questions?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for this presentation, everyone. It was very helpful, very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, We give you all praise, honor, and thanks for all that you are and all that you have been in our life. We thank you this day for coming together with all our expertise that we have, but we know it's all because you make it possible. We thank you, Lord, and we give you praise, honor, and thanks for who you are in our lives. We know that things happen in our lives that we certainly aren't always able to handle on our own, but you provide the assistance, the guidance, and the expertise. So we thank you for our presenters who have so eloquently presented a cause for us to rally around and to be more proactive in making sure that we do the work now before it is necessary to happen in a stressful situation, so that we will reduce the burden and stress on our loved ones. Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all that has already transpired, and we thank you for all that will transpire. Go with each and every one of us represented here today and our families, and everywhere that we go, we will know that we are your children and you are our God. So thank you, Lord. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Have a blessed day, everyone. Amen.
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 Good meeting. And
Sir, take care, everyone.
Take care,
Take
everyone.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now. Reverend Diane, I'll be talking to you.
I'll be talking to you.
I got a new part.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege for us to do this.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Looks like we got Reverend Curtis on the line, huh?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Hello.
Got
Come
the
on,
big
Reverend
guns
Curtis.
at Hartford. And another Morehouse man, I might add on top of that.
Oh,
But,
okay. Okay.
all right. Well,
Okay, guys.
again, this is recorded, so it's going to be on that same link that that you access the course, and that's the same link for all the documents, all of the videos, even the Netflix one that we weren't able to show. I'll put a link to that on the website as well, and the documents and the Grave Matters, the original course of this. So all of that will be from that one site, which you can access from Hartford's website, as well as directly from the the link that you had. So
Okay.
all right.
All righty.
All right.
Thanks.